Everybody probably just got a pop-up warning that we're being live streamed.
Yeah.
All right, almost there. Sorry, I always have to find all this stuff again every time I want to get something started. I should have like a how-to doc for myself to remind myself where all the buttons and features are.
Either that or have a teenager do it for you.
Not a bad idea. All right, so we are live here with Al McCarn of B'nai Yosef North America, and we are going to talk about biblical leadership, especially in the context of the Torah movement. If you're not familiar with this concept, this is a spontaneous movement, essentially worldwide, of believers in Jesus, either returning to keeping God's law, trying to examine it, how does this fit into our lives as believers today, or Jews discovering Jesus is the Messiah. And there's a huge, really wide variation within this movement. You know, there are groups that fit in the concept or in the umbrella of Hebrew roots. And there's a different definition of that depending on who you want to ask. Messianic Judaism, pronomianism, all these different labels. And, where a congregation fits in is kind of up to who you're talking to at the moment, because just the very nature of a spontaneous movement like this means we don't fit into boxes very easily. We are what we are. And hopefully we are led by the Spirit and not by ourselves, but there will always be a mix. So I want to introduce Al here real quick. I seem to have a penchant for finding people to come and talk with Common Sense Bible Study who have a military background. I'm a veteran. Maybe it's just that I connect more easily with other veterans. Al spent 30 years in the United States Army, military intelligence. He has been with B'nai Yosef for how many years, Al?
Well, we are in the 8th year now. We began in 2016.
All right, and you've had some leadership experience in, congregation and with B'nai Yosef, and of course in the military as an officer. There's a lot of training and practical leadership experience that comes with that. So if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about your ministry, B'nai Yosef, your congregation in South Carolina. What's going on in your life right now?
Let's see. Number one thing going on in life is I'm a grandfather.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Yes. We had our grandson with us last week, and I don't know how grandparents do this when they're raising their grandchildren, but that's just totally turned things around. Of all the accomplishments in my life, being husband and father, that's number one.
Mm-hmm.
I am so proud of my daughters. I'm so glad they are married to godly men. And we are expecting grandchild number 3 in October. I have the most beautiful little granddaughter living in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and my grandson lives just 10 minutes away here in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And so when it comes to leadership, Jay, I am learning more and more day by day, the older I get, that it starts at the home.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever we want to project out to the congregation, the community, the business, the government at whatever level, if you can't be a leader in the home, then you're going to have some big problems in these other realms. In fact, that's something that Paul explained. At B'nai Yosef, when we were and I will say I am the executive director, and I'm the guy, the leader of the admin council. We have a council of elders who are our they're our elders, they're our covering. They are the men and women who are the congregational leaders and have so much wisdom, so many years of walking with Yeshua, and many of them with pastoral backgrounds. And together we came up with some leadership guidelines, both for whoever would want to be an elder and whoever would want to be part of the administrative council.
Hmm.
So let me just start there. I mean,
Okay, great.
when you're talking about biblical leadership, and I appreciate looking at it in this context of the Torah awakening, as I call it.
Hmm.
And what we have now, people who've left the traditional church and are in home fellowships or newly found congregations, or at least, or maybe they're just isolated by themselves at home and watching ministries online.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll address that in a little bit. But I'll tell you, the Bible is a leadership manual for every aspect of life. And as I was thinking about it, I could name off examples of biblical standards for military and entrepreneurial and political leadership and patriarchal leadership and matriarchal leadership, leadership in the community, prophetic leadership, pastoral leadership, priestly, all of that is there and more. We have good examples and we have bad examples.
Hmm.
But there are certain things that cut across all of them. And so let's look at the common denominators. This is what we started with B'nai Yosef back when we were founded in 2016, 2017. So what did Moses say, or what did Moses learn? Whenever we're starting this, let's go to the foundation and look at the Torah. That's what Yeshua did. I mean, he said, look at the Torah first. What did Moses say? In Exodus 18, we've got some standards of leadership that actually were given to Moses by his Midianite father-in-law.
Hmm.
So let me just read this out. In chapter 18 of Exodus, in verse 18, it says, you and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You're not able to do it alone. Jethro is saying this to Moses because Moses is trying to be the single leader of the entire nation of Israel. That was a bad idea. So here's the advice. Now obey my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. And you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from all the people. How do we define able? We'll get to that. Men who fear God, number one. Do they have a relationship with the Almighty? Who are trustworthy and hate a bribe? And place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens, and let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you, and you will be able to endure, and all this people also will go to their place in peace. And then it goes on to explain how Moses listened to what Jethro said, and that's how they established the governmental structure of Israel from the family and clan level all the way up to the national level to Moses himself. So what I'm seeing in here is the minimal requirements of character in leadership, and that's the number one thing. So, is there a relationship with the Almighty? Are these men, and I would say men and women, are they people who fear God? Are they trustworthy? Are they above reproach? And are they not going to be tempted by any kind of a bribe or gift or whatever it is to influence their opinion and cause them to twist justice or give undue favor to someone rather than trying to be impartial? This is what it's going to take to begin to be considered qualified as a leader in any realm. So we see through the Tanakh, the Old Testament, how this played out in good ways and in bad. And we can see even in the life of individual persons like David, where he made good choices and he made bad choices. But he seemed to come back to some kind of standard that caused him to be eventually described at the end of his life as a man after God's own heart. And still to this day, that's how we regard him. Even though, let's see, David had sexual sin. David had all kinds of other sin. He conspired to commit murder. He shed innocent blood. David probably wasn't a guy that I would want to have dated my daughters.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there's something about his qualities that endeared him to the Lord, and especially the qualities of, as my friend Pete Wilson says, he didn't make the same sin twice, but repenting and returning to God and seeking forgiveness and seeking change to his life. So I imagine that the David at the end of his life would have been much, much different than the David at 18 or 20 years of age when he was first anointed as king.
Yeah.
So
he would have had a lot to say to that younger guy.
Yes, he would have. Yes. Okay, so let's get to the apostolic writings, the New Testament, because we are, in a sense, well, we have come out of the church, or we could still be called Christians. And let me just say this about labels. Jay, thanks for your comments up front about the Torah awakening, the spontaneous Torah movement. I would say spontaneous because God is doing this around the world. So we really don't know what to label ourselves. And I would say that's not as important an issue as we make it out to be. I've been in this walk for over 20 years now. And there was a time I was very, very concerned about particular words. Don't call me a Christian. I've left the church. I'm not a Christian. I'm a Hebrew. Well, yes, I am.
Yeah.
I am Messianic. Yes, I am, because I follow the Messiah of Israel. But you know what? When I'm talking to my Jewish friends, and that's a big part of the focus that God has for me and my family, is healing that breach between these two halves of his covenant family, the Jewish half and the Christian half. Or if you're an unreformed two-house Ephraimite like me, Judah and Ephraim, or Judah and Joseph. Okay. They all see us as Christians. And if I go to them and say, no, I'm not a Christian, I'm a Hebrew roots believer, or I'm an Ephraimite, they'll get confused and might get, might get mad for one thing, because I'm calling myself a Hebrew and they say, well, you're not Jewish. No, I'm not. I'm part of the other guys that are grafted in, which is another topic. So when Paul is saying, I will be all things to all people so that by any means I might win some, I'm conscious of the audience that I'm addressing. And I am working so much with traditional Christians of many streams, Christian Zionists who very much are supporting Israel and working with the Jewish people to bring about the full restoration of Israel and the nations with it. And I'm working with Orthodox Jews. So I do not mind the label Christian. That's my heritage. I professed faith in Jesus Christ when I was 9 years old. He is the one who brought me into relationship with the Almighty. And therefore, although I have preferences for what terms, what labels to use, I'm not going to argue with you about it. Therefore, if we're talking Old Testament, New Testament, or Tanakh, apostolic writings, it refers to the same bodies of Scripture. So let's get to the New Testament and hear what Jesus said, or Yeshua. I knew him as Jesus. We all knew him as Jesus. But here's what he said in Matthew 20, starting in verse 25, when his disciples had an argument about who's in charge. He says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So this is another crucial aspect of someone who wants to be, or someone who is placed in a position of leadership. You're in there to be a servant.
Mhm.
Moses got that from Jethro, where the perspective there is you're a servant of God and a servant of these people. You're not there to make yourself rich or famous or powerful. God put you in this position, and this is the way you want to delegate the responsibility so that you can be the best servant to these people. And in that sense, you're being a minister of God to them. I would contend that this is the case where we're talking either a pastoral position or even a military position or any leadership position whatsoever. The best leaders I've encountered are the ones who looked after their people and did what they could to provide for them. Whether it's time off to deal with a family issue, or helping them to get equipped to do the jobs that they've been assigned to, whatever it is, the servant leader is the one who's looking first for his or her people.
Mhm.
Because if you don't take care of the people, the mission is not going to get accomplished. Now, that sounds great in theory. Walking it out is really hard. And that's why Yeshua is so direct in telling this to his disciples, because it's totally counter to the way that the world wants to do it. And this is where, Jay, you ask about our congregation here in Rock Hill. This is where I'll put in a plug for my pastor, Matthew Vanderels. This is the kind of leadership that he's teaching, because he's been wrestling for years with what does it mean to be in the kingdom of the Messiah of Israel here on this earth that is still devoted to the kingdoms of the world. And Matt does a great job teaching on this, where he contrasts the way the world does things, the beastly empires of the world, of which, by the way, the United States of America is one of them.
Mhm.
It's all about who has control, who's got power, how we can lord it over others.
Yeah, it's all the Machiavellian approach to leadership.
That's right, which I learned being a that's it. And it's all about power, who's got it, who doesn't have it, who wants it, how to use it. Even the kingdom of God is about power. It is political. But what Yeshua is telling us here is you turn that on its head. It's not out there for you to grasp and to make yourself great and powerful. No, you're going to be in a position because God directs you into it. So if you've got someone who wants to be mayor or police chief or pastor or something, wants that, well, you might want to take a look at them again and see if they're the right ones for the job, because it's usually the ones who don't want it but are thrust into it that are the right candidates.
Mm-hmm. But didn't Paul say that it's a good thing to want to be an elder or an overseer?
Yes, it is. It is. But I'll tell you how my approach has been in any situation, whether it's even just a group of people deciding, well, where do we want to go for dinner? I don't like to be the one to step up and say, this is the way we should go. Follow me. I would rather do this in a group sense so that we can come to a consensus. And if it so happens that I end up gravitating into the leadership position, well, fine, I can do that. But I also don't mind being the supporter of the one who takes that position.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm running in there every time saying, I'm the one with the power and the anointing, and you should follow me, well, that's the biggest reason that you should run the other way.
Yeah. That is a big red flag.
It is. It is. It is. I mean, okay. So that's what I understand from what Yeshua is saying here. Let's go on to what Paul said. And he's got some qualifications for leaders, especially in a congregational setting. And he wrote these twice, once to Timothy and once to Titus. But let's look and see what he said. In Titus chapter 1, verse 5, he says, "This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained into order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you." Now, notice, every town. So it's not just a local congregation. And this is where I think we need to have our horizons expanded. We are used to denominational Christianity. And we are seeing, well, okay, Baptists and Methodists, they can get along even though the Methodists don't baptize right. And let's see, Baptists and Pentecostals, they could sort of kind of get along as long as those Pentecostals don't start that weird stuff and that language we don't understand. Baptists and Catholics, no, that won't work. They're not even Christian. Guess what denomination I grew up in? That's not really the way that I think that our God wants us to think.
Yeah.
Because he's called us out of the nations, out of everything that we have known and has identified us. And he's called us to be part of his covenant nation of Israel. So we're supposed to be thinking communally. And family and the community, the local community, are the building blocks for the nation. So we start at that local level, and that's why Paul is saying, I wanted you to appoint elders in every town, not just to oversee the preaching, but to oversee how this community grows and matures in the Lord and looks out for one another and connects with the community in the next town so that you've got a regional, could we say government? I don't know. We have a regional assembly of peoples who are different from their neighbors, different because they follow the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and are looking toward the fulfillment of his kingdom promises. So that's a whole lot different than joining the church down the street and just coming in on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights or on Saturdays for Shabbat services. What's been built here in Rock Hill at Founded in Truth Fellowship is a community. We do meet on Shabbat. We do hear some good teaching. We do worship the Lord. We do teach our children. But it's bigger than that because we understand that we are assembled together as a community, and so we look out for each other. And that's why we have people coming from, as far away as 2 hours from all directions to come on Shabbat or to come for the feasts. Okay, so let's go on back to Titus. What is Paul saying? Appoint elders in every town if anyone is above reproach. Okay, there again is the character. That's number one. Husband of one wife. Well, there's a loaded one. Makes sense to me, husband of one wife. Or I could say as well, and we can talk about this as well, wife of one husband. One thing we have learned at B'nai SF is, hey, elders are male and female. Anyway, got one spouse. Children are believers and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination. Hey, that gets to the Torah requirement of if you have unruly children and they're not going to repent and you can't deal with them after they are adults and you have tried, well, go to the elders and say, this son of ours is a glutton and a drunkard and rebellious. Well, we don't need that in our congregational or communal leaders. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning. True leadership begins at the home. And if parents cannot govern their home, maybe they need to get that right before looking to do anything else in a leadership capacity. All right, to continue, Paul says, for an overseer as God's steward. Understand that identity aspect. It's the same thing that Jethro said to Moses. You are representing God to the people. And that works from the top down at all levels. If you're in a godly community setting, then you are God's steward for what he's put in your hands and put you in charge of. God's steward must be above reproach, must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable. Abraham was hospitable. He invited people in, even if they were not worshipers of the God of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A lover of good, as God defines good, not as we define good. Self-controlled, well, that's a big one. Upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught. So that means you got to have some understanding of the scriptures so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine and also to rebuke those who contradict it.
Yeah. It seems like there's a common thread through all of that. And it goes back to it being about the people, not about the leader. Is that if the leader is in it at all for his own purposes, probably not the right guy for the job.
Exactly. And that part about knowing the word, that's essential. God bless pastors. My father-in-law, blessed memory, was a pastor and an army chaplain. And I appreciate that they come out of seminary with some knowledge of the scriptures, but it must not stop there. That's just the starting point. We got to be in the word regularly. And we have to model this in front of our children and model this in front of our fellow community members, whether it's a Saturday or a Sunday congregation. And that gets to exactly what God said through Moses. Talk about my commandments when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, teach them to your children. That did not change with when we flip the page from Old Testament to New Testament. So godly leadership, biblical leadership is leadership that understands the Bible and is continuing to seek out greater understanding, not in a vacuum, but in the context of others who know this. And let me brag on my pastor again, Matthew Vanderels, and those that he has networked with, like Matt Napper and like Chris Franke and Brad and Erica Bronze. And these are all people who are diligent about studying the word. And they are diligent about getting those credentials, like Matt Napper, who's got his seminary degree. And I don't know if he's got his PhD yet, but he was about to earn it. This is something that's been lacking in the Torah movement because we have come out of the church and said, oh, they lied to us about the Torah and about the Sabbath and about the feasts and all. And we're rejecting everything that came in the church and in the process throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. And often embracing a whole nother set of dirty water nonsense.
Exactly. So you got to have good godly counsel. You got to have people who understand the scriptures who are helping each other. That's the iron sharpening iron part. Yeah. Okay. Let me just refer that to 1 Timothy 3. I'll read this very quickly. It's the last bit of the scriptural qualifications for elders that we at B'nai Yosef North America have identified as what we want in our leaders. Paul says this to Timothy: the saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. And that's what you said earlier, Jay, about aspiring to the office. Yeah, we should want this. We shouldn't seize it, but we should want to be mentors and right. Especially as we get older, the ones who can help the younger ones come along in godly development.
Yeah, probably so more than anything else, we should want to be qualified for those positions.
Yes. So he says here the same thing he said to Timothy or to Titus. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. Okay, wait a minute. That doesn't mean beating them into submission. That doesn't mean being a tyrant over them, but finding the right ways so that the children understand that they must be submissive to authority. There's good reason for that. Still got room to question, still got room to develop on your own, but understand that you must submit to your elders. And the elders, on the other hand, this is why character is so important. They have to guard these precious children as the jewels they are and keep them from harm the best they can. See, it's a mutual trust thing. The children would be submissive if they understand that their parents and the elders have their best interests at heart and that they are safe with them. So, okay, continuing on. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? Yep. He must not be a recent convert. That could be a problem. Or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. So you got to have someone who's seasoned and mature. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil.
And that is often a very difficult one in these home congregations.
The being thought well of by outsiders.
Well, in my experience, a lot of these home fellowships that crop up, and I'm one of them, or we are one of them here. So, I mean, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. But the people who are often willing to step up and host a Torah study in their homes can be eccentric. And, eccentricities aren't necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes that stems from some character flaws that make them very unlikable to people who don't understand what they're about. And that can be a problem for the whole group.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it certainly can. And, this is the strength, or has been the strength, of denominational Christianity in being able to set standards for leadership. And therefore, there's an inherent degree of credibility, at least institutionally speaking. We all know that of the problems. We understand that. But we don't have that right now because we're the new guys on the block. And I look back 500 years ago at the Reformation, when people came out of the Catholic Church. And so we had a similar thing. Home fellowships, individual believers who suddenly have the Bible in their own language and they're reading it and studying it and saying, the priest didn't tell us this. And that's how you get conflict among the different reformers. I mean, there's Luther in Germany, and there's Knox in Scotland, and there's the guy in Geneva.
Is that Wycliffe?
No, Wycliffe died 2 centuries earlier. Calvin in Geneva. Zwingli came a century later, but all these, and I love I did a seminar on the English Reformation. It's one of my favorite classes in grad school. And what was happening in the 15th and 16th, 17th centuries in England with the different Protestant denominations as they were developing. But that's just it. They were developing. The only model they had was either the Church of England or the Church of Rome. And they're trying to come together with something that's more in line with what they're reading in the scriptures. But they're being persecuted within and without. They're not part of the established church, whether they're Catholic or Anglican. They are dissenters, and therefore they're persecuted by the government and by the established church. They're also cut off from other elements of the Reformation movement because they believe a little differently. Quakers are way out over here, but the separatist Puritans are way over here. Quakers are more like Pentecostals, and the Puritans are more like Episcopalians and Presbyterians. That's where we are now. God is doing something now of the same order of magnitude or even greater than what he did in the Reformation, because he is restoring to his body something we've lost, and namely the Torah and our identity as part of the Commonwealth of Israel, according to Paul in Ephesians 2.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What does that mean is we're turning our face from Rome or London or wherever to Jerusalem. And it's a messy process because it's a birthing process. And that's why we need each other. And we need to learn rules of civility and rules of standards of conduct, like what we've seen in Scripture, so that we can wrestle. It's okay to wrestle. It's okay to argue, but understand we are of the same family and come up with the answers as the Lord reveals them.
Yeah, good word. There are some practical sides to, I'm not sure what the term is. I want to call it a startup congregation, but denominations have the idea of a church plant, where they will send a team somewhere and say, we're going to start a church here. And they've got a plan, they've got a project plan, they've got a template that they use everywhere they go. They're going to do it the same way. Some of them are more famous for this than others. Like Vineyard and Calvary Chapel. I mean, they've got it down. But in a spontaneous movement of the Spirit, people are just like finding each other, and they're putting their pin on the 119 Ministries Fellowship Finder map, and then they're just emailing each other saying, "Hey, you want to get together for a study?" And what do they do when they get to the point where there are conflicts starting, or somebody's got to start making decisions? And how do they figure out who's going to be making decisions and how?
This is where I would recommend talking to people who have gone through that process. I would recommend Matthew Vanderels and Pete Wilson and Jason Price, who are our three ruling elders of Founded in Truth. Elders, they're all younger than me, and I'm the old guy. But they went through this process. Home Fellowship in Charlotte, North Carolina, that grew so that it split apart, and Fit is now the one that went south. So we're in Rock Hill. Celebrating, I think, 10 years in existence now. This Sukkot will be the 10th year of our congregational Sukkot. So talk to them about how it happened and how the transition went from home fellowship to actual, church. Another one of those labels. Don't be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Okay. It's helps other people understand who we are.
We're stuck with English.
We're stuck with English. Our elders at B'nai Yosef have gone through the same thing, like Barry and Laura Phillips, who are the leaders of House of David in Gloucester, Virginia. Barry was pastor of, I think it was Church of God in Virginia, and the Lord showed him Shabbat and the feasts. And, oh, by the way, I want you to leave the institutional church and go this direction.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got quite a testimony of how he went from a pastor of a denomination and of good standing to all of a sudden leading a Bible study in their home. And now it's become a fellowship that has just celebrated 20 years. Mark and Polly Webb, also elders of ours at Living Messiah in Mesa, Arizona, went through a similar process. Their congregation is, for Hebrew roots congregations, it's like a megachurch, and they are also doing good work in the community. And they are working on developing a property in the southern part of Arizona that can be a farm for a community. And this gets to another thing, Jay. one of those, what we cannot afford to throw out, the baby with the bathwater, is all those things that the church still does for being the hands and feet of Jesus, as I like to say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right now, FIT is one of the partner churches with a ministry called Fostering the Family in South Carolina, which exists to come around or bring the churches to come around foster and adopter families in their congregations and in their communities to help deal with the cycle of foster care in South Carolina and get these 4,400 children in the foster system, out of the foster system, and into a godly, loving home. And that's a ministry that intersects with so many other things, crisis pregnancies, drug use, sexual abuse, human trafficking, all the gamut. Why are God's people not involved more? Well, you know what? As we are still learning the Torah and transitioning from Sunday church to Shabbat and the feasts, don't forget the widows and the orphan.
Yeah, that has been a big problem.
Yeah.
Is that I think a lot of that is due to just a period of disorientation.
Yeah.
We're trying to figure out who we are. And so we've put this huge emphasis on studying the scriptures and identity. But in the process, we're losing the most important part of the identity of the Sunday churches that we left, which is helping the community we're in. And not just our own people who meet in our building, but reaching out to the rest of the community and providing those services for orphans and widows and the sick and prisons. Yeah. There's some huge needs there, and we're not doing a good job of it.
No, we're not. But I have hope, because I have seen some bright lights. I'm seeing how Barry and Laura are reaching out to people in their community, particularly First Nations communities in that part of Virginia. And these are first contact nations. When Jamestown was founded in 1607, well, the natives were there and they're still there. Or Mark and Polly out in Arizona have been part of an effort, a interdenominational effort to help illegal aliens as they're coming across, because they do need help. And we still need to do this thing, even as we're struggling with, well, who are we?
Yeah.
What has not changed is that we are redeemed by the blood of Yeshua of Nazareth, our Messiah. And that we should never, ever forget.
All right. We're about 50 minutes into the conversation. So I want to open this up to any questions or comments. And I'm pretty sure Scott has got something that he's itching to bring up. But while everybody is thinking about that, and you can use the Zoom feature of raising your hand if you want, or if there's a dead spot, just go ahead and unmute yourself and speak up. But while we're waiting for y'all to think about what you want to ask, Al, if you don't mind sharing your URL for B'nai Yosef, for your personal blog, anything else that you want to share with everybody, how they can find information about, I understand that you've got a book that you wrote. Where can people find these things?
Well, let's see, starting with the book, which is called Give Me a Place Where I May Dwell. It was published in 2015. You can still get it on Amazon in Kindle format. It's no longer in print. But okay, so there are other books that I've contributed to. There's my blog, The Barking Fox. So you can go to thebarkingfox.com. Let me make sure I got that right. Yes. Thebarkingfox.com. Why did I name it that? Because when I was sitting in my living room one night in Virginia, I heard this strange sound, and I looked out the window, and there was a red fox across the street barking. And I thought, what a great name for something one day. That's why my blog is called The Barking Fox. But there you can find books that I've contributed to, which includes a chapter in 10 from the Nations. My Israeli Jewish friend, Dr. Rivka Lambert Adler, first published that in 2017. She's now got a second edition. And it's just trying to document this Torah awakening among Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
So my story's in there along with a number of others. My friends Josh Ensley and David Wilbur have published a book through Pronomian Publications, which, let's see, How I Love Your Law. Is that? No. Anyway, it's goes through the Torah cycle, and I'm one of the contributors there. So you can look at that on thebarkingfox.com, my blog. Every week I'm producing two things. One is a 10-minute Torah commentary, which is called Rebuild. And, comes out on Shabbat mornings on my blog, but it also plays on I Will Gather You Radio, a ministry of Founded in Truth Fellowship, on Fridays and Saturdays. And that's just a 10-minute devotional on the Torah portion. And then I've got a annual Bible reading plan, and it's time to start updating that for the biblical year 5784 that is dawning upon us. But you can download that there, and it reads through the Bible every year based on the Torah reading cycle, but it includes all of the New Testament, all the Psalms and Prophets. So that's my blog. And also B'nai Yosef North America, you can find us at BNEYYOSEFNA.com, B'naiYosefNA.com. We also produce a lot of good articles and resources, and we've got a weekly podcast called Reunion Roadmap, and you can hear me and three of my good buddies, two of our elders, David Jones and Barry Phillips, have a midrash there every week, and my friend Fania Pappas and I bring the show in and close it out, and we have an interview segment as well. So that's some of where you can find my stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, our stuff I'm contributing to. It's more fun to do it in a team.
Yeah. Yeah. Paula's already got her hand up. So Paula, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yeah. Hi, Al. Thank you very much for doing this.
Hi.
We really appreciate the things you shared, especially just the way that you've brought out the scriptures and just shared point by point, like each aspect of not just the Old Testament writings, but the New Testament and what the Word has to say about leadership. Jay probably told you that we're kind of in the midst of lots of developments in our fellowship, and we're walking this out, like looking at the scriptures and really trying to see what's happening, in the context of what we're doing, and really trying to evaluate and understand, who's qualified, who's not qualified. What does that mean? What does that look like to lead? So I think this is really helpful. But I have a question, because I feel like sometimes there are gray areas or context that kind of falls in these areas or these zones that we might not have great answers for. And I was thinking about like leadership within a congregation, elders, overseers. I understand the scripture does talk about a husband of a wife. So we're looking at, is someone, reliable, married, and not prone to be looking around at lots of women for, needs that they have, right? But, one of the things that that I was curious about is like, in terms of eldership, like older people who might be widowed, who, we don't necessarily know all the history of like what their marriage might have been like, or maybe we judge by their relationship with their children. I'm not sure. Like, do we have any, do you have any experience with this kind of stuff? And my expectation is that they're not necessarily disqualified because they don't have a husband or wife. But what do we look at in those cases?
I think we might have lost Al there. I'm not sure though. Is video frozen for everybody else or just me?
It looks like it's frozen for me. I don't know about everybody else.
Okay.
We're still on, Greg and Anissa here, and
Okay.
we see your video.
Yeah, it looks like we lost Al.
Yeah, Al just dropped off. Yeah, well, we'll wait for Al to reconnect there. Maybe share some of my own thoughts on that. Everybody has a past. There's, Al brought up the example of David earlier in all of the mistakes that he made in his life, and he usually tried to do the right thing, even though he often did it in the wrong ways, but sometimes took advantage of his position, gave into his personal desires, abused the authority he had. But it was always that heart to repent. And as soon as, God sent Nathan to draw his attention to his sin, and as soon as he did, David repented. He paid a heavy price for some of those sins. But I think the key is what's going on in that person's life now and for the immediate past. Is their ongoing sin. If somebody has been divorced and remarried multiple times, and his current marriage is in disarray, well, that's obviously a problem. But if there was some understandable sort of situation, if you have personal knowledge of the person's life, then you're going to be a better judge of that. I don't think it's possible from too much on the outside to be able to say, this person is disqualified because I know these facts about his life, but I don't necessarily know him. You can tell if there's a pattern, but if all you know are, the broad outline of his life, it's probably not enough. You need to know that person. Welcome back, Al.
Hey, we have a bodacious South Carolina thunderstorm that knocked us offline for a moment.
Oh.
Sorry to miss the question, Paula.
Jay was trying to add to so his thoughts to
yeah. Do you want to sum up your question again, Paula?
Yeah. I was just asking, like, in the context of someone who might be an older, maybe in retirement age beyond, but maybe be widowed or maybe be divorced for whatever reasons. Are they disqualified from leadership, or how do you really, what are the next kind of things that you might look at? Or do you encourage them into other roles? I guess those are questions because they seem like really great areas to me.
Well, they are great questions. I can tell you from the context of BNASF North America. I can also tell you from the developing context of Founded in Truth what I've observed. And by the way, from most of our experience in denominational Christianity, the model that we inherited from Western Christianity is elders, deacons, however you want to call it, that body of leadership is male, pretty much, unless you're Assemblies of God, and then male, female, okay, depends on your tradition. But they're not really looking at it as married couples together occupying the position.
Yeah.
So you can have, and even the Catholic Church has still this, the priests are celibate. If you're married when you're ordained, well, you're grandfathered in and you can still be married. Okay, so what is it that we are trying to build here? We've had a lot of input from the native communities. Two of our elders emeritus are Dr. Sukina, who is Inuit, and his wife, Kamanique, who is Cherokee. And in the native societies, they are the ones who have helped us understand that the Council of Elders is male or female, and the chief elder can be either one, which makes a whole lot of sense, especially if you're in a nation that has a matrilineal society and matrilineal descent. And I think that applies to the body of Messiah as well, depending on what are the community standards. But that's kind of straying off from what you asked, Paula. At BNASF, we have for the last several years now regarded eldership as the joint male-female married partner position. But we have had a case where one of our men lost his wife. And at that point he was elderly and not quite able to carry on by himself the duties of an elder. So we honor him by calling him Elder Emeritus. But he's no longer active in that role. And I think it depends on a case-by-case basis. We don't, where am I going with this? If you're saying there is someone who has no spouse or has lost a spouse, are they still qualified for eldership? Or is that the crux of the question?
Pretty much.
Yeah. I can give you Al's personal opinion. Depends on the person. But if you're in association with a body, like I am with Bina, that's something we're going to have to come to terms with collectively. And in the one case that we've dealt with so far, this is how we did it.
That's great. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Mm-hmm. That is a
Anybody
bodacious
else?
thunderstorm out there.
Yeah, I've been seeing what looks like the flashes of lightning on the glass behind you.
Oh yeah. It's there's a guy who went down the street in a boat with animals.
We need some of that down here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment on that. Again, as Al did, I'd say this is my comment, my own opinion, but it seems to me that if you had a body of believers that had a widower or previously divorced person or a widow, that where you were considering for a role as elder within the community, one of the important aspects would be what are they looking for in their life? As a man that was maybe a widower, if his goal is to find a wife, he probably wouldn't be the best person to be sitting in an eldership role, because his focus is different than what an elder's focus should be. So there's those type of questions that you have to know out of who the person is and what is their outlook on where their life is moving forward and how they can serve the body, rather than am I needing to serve me first and then the body.
Great point, Ron.
Yeah, that's an aspect that I hadn't really thought of. Thinking of this idea of a husband of one wife being, forbidding womanizers, essentially, like people who are collecting, women. You don't want those kind of people in leadership. But what about the guy who is he just needs a wife? There's nothing wrong with that. It's not a sin. It's just that he's got a distraction and a temptation, perhaps, to use his position for the wrong reasons.
Yes.
Let me chime in with another thought on this. And it gets to what kind of leadership are we talking about? What specific roles? Because we're talking, Paul is the one who wrote husband of one wife twice, but he's also the one who said, I wish that everyone would be like me, not married. All right. And I've spent the last 50 years of my life trying to unpack that statement, among others that Paul wrote, as have we all, right? But think about Paul's position, what he was doing. Paul, the apostle, was the itinerant overseer and establisher of congregational communities. And it was not a life, as far as I can understand, of Paul's life and career. It was not a life that was conducive to a stable marriage and home and family. So if that is the reason Paul said, I would rather that you not get married, as in he's looking for other leaders, itinerant apostolic leaders like him, or candidates for such position, then, okay, I get that. I get it. But if you're going to be planted in one place, in one community, over one congregation, then it's best to have some stability, which husband and wife together bring much better than a single person can bring.
Good point.
That is a great point.
Who else has any questions or comments for Al? Al?
Okay, Jay, I'll go.
Should I be scared?
No. Hi, Al. Thanks for taking my call. So, my experience is one of when I left the church, I certainly saw the business aspect of the church. I found it repulsive, to be honest. Did not like it. However, understanding that that is a necessary function of what happens when you move from home fellowshipping to congregation. My experience is there's a breakdown in terms of trying to transition from home fellowship to congregations. What would you recommend in that regard? I'm currently in Maine and I'm dealing with a number of home fellowships, and honestly, you deal with the uniqueness of each family and what they bring in their strengths and weaknesses into that. So I'm just curious as to your comments in that regard.
Well, Scott, that's a great question. And it's something that at Bina we have been wrestling with and haven't yet come up with a good set of answers. And actually, I have not walked that journey myself. I've always been a member of a congregation or part of a home fellowship or, leading a Bible study in my home. But going through that transition, I have never walked it. So I don't know that I can give you a good answer, but I could throw the ball over to Ron Runyon because he and his wife Candy have done such a thing. And I could also suggest talking to our elders at Bina because they have done this. And they're also, even now, trying to figure out, well, how could we do congregational affiliations? So if you'd like to be part of the conversation, I'm sure they would appreciate your input, and we'd be glad to make that happen.
Sure. I mean, the thing that I'm seeing is the confederation of home fellowships it's nice, unique, and enjoyable, but they are not congregations. So,
right.
There seems to be a differentiation. So definitely would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Jay, if you can help us connect,
Sure.
Then.
Yeah, I'll Scott, if it's all right with you, I'll give you your contact information to Al later.
That sounds fine. Thanks.
Ron, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll put a little input into that. We've been part of a home fellowship for going on 15 years now, and even when we were before we understood the Torah and what Father has for us in the fullness of Scripture, we were part of a fellowship that was actively promoted home groups within the fellowship, the greater church assembly. And so our transition has been from greater church assembly into home communities to build relationship. And then when Father moved us up to Washington, we no longer were part of a greater assembly. And so the home fellowship grew out of people that were isolated and alone. And we said, let's get together and let God teach us as a group rather than as individuals. And the challenge has been for us that we don't have a gifted pastoral person within our fellowship, that someone that has that calling on their life. And that makes it difficult to transition into a larger setting where you're now going to rent space and have expenses and have a budget that has to be dealt with and so forth. If you don't have someone that steps into that role of leader and willing to be pastoral over the community. And so the challenge, I just see that as an ongoing challenge for home fellowships in transitioning into that. My wife has something to say.
At one point, we did discuss the thought about, is it time that we rented a space on a weekly basis or monthly basis? But we all decided as a group that we didn't want to have that responsibility and the expense of a building.
Yeah.
Yeah, for something consistent like a lease or even a purchase.
So that is a real challenge to move from home fellowship into a rental space, and the necessary roles of, if I can use the term, deacons to help set up and tear down, and all the added things that get added once you move out of a home into a public setting.
Yeah, there's even some legal considerations there.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because then you swerve into, oh, am I actually getting a rest on Sabbath? Is this because these are the nuts and bolts which are required to participate in at least a group setting for Sabbath? Well, then there are some that are not experiencing that. So it's an interesting, weights that you have to weigh out.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it difficult to move from home fellowship into a larger, more public setting.
Yeah, one of the things that I've thought of over the years is how God structured the nation of Israel. Originally, before there was a king, you had a judge figure. The first one was Moses, and then Joshua, and so on through the judges. And then the high priest, who is sort of a parallel authority with the judge. The judge ultimately is answerable to the high priest, but not in civil government capacity. More like is he behaving himself? And then you've got two parallel structures under that. You've got the priesthood, and you've got tribal elders. The Sanhedrin. Well, Sanhedrin was probably something like a legislature. But you still had the tribal chiefs, who, in our American context, would be something like state governors. And then you've got, the captains of hundreds and tens, and all these different levels. And it was very much like not a representative democracy. I mean, there might have been some elements of democracy on the lower levels where they selected their, whoever your local judge was, that kind of thing. But sort of a confederation where each of the tribes was independent, did its own thing, but there was this body of people above them, what we call the Sanhedrin, and the judge above that. And, the judge was never independent. He wasn't a dictator, or, actually in the classic Roman sense, he was a dictator because he was appointed for a military purpose for a short period of time. But his capacity was limited. He couldn't go around the country telling everybody how to live. He couldn't tell the tribes how to do their thing. He was there to settle conflicts. If they had a case they couldn't handle, just like what Yitro told Moses, mm-hmm. If there's something these other judges can't figure out, they'll bring it to you. If the whole nation needs to go to war, the judge was your supreme commander. But otherwise, the tribes were left to their own devices to figure out how to run their own tribal territories on their own. And I wonder how much of this is transferable into I hate to use that word denomination, but what else do you call a confederation of fellowships? But, a denomination by another name.
Okay, so Jay, you have just launched onto another path, or rather a parallel path. But this is something that another thing we've been wrestling with at Bina for our entire existence of 7.5 years. Mm-hmm. Because we're understanding that we're not called to establish a new denomination, even though our elders have come from a denominational model. We're not called to establish a political movement. even though there's something inherently political in becoming a people from those who were not a people. I mean, what are we becoming? We're becoming part of the Commonwealth of Israel, to be joined with Judah, who is the visible remnant of the nation of Israel, now back in the land with the Jewish state of Israel. You know, I'm talking big horizon stuff here, but we're talking, how does it play out in Central Texas or in South Carolina or in Illinois, there where Russ lives? This is why I would suggest that we are going to find some very useful models in Native American tribal structure and how they run councils and elders. And I would suggest also, let's go ask the Amish. How do you exist as a community within a community that is not, I mean, separated, but still part of the wider community? That's what we're establishing here. That's what God is establishing. He doesn't want us to build a whole new denomination that just meets on Saturdays now, but still does the same things that we did on Sundays. No, he's restoring to his body an identity piece, just like 500 years ago, who restored the word of God in native languages so that people could read and study it for themselves. And he began to restore that organic structure that is not top-down driven, which is the hierarchical Church of Rome, for example. But he wants it further decentralized. And that's where it gets messy. And that's why the people of Israel wanted a king. Because that model that they lived under for 4 centuries just wasn't quite the same as the Hittite Empire up there and the Egyptian Empire down here and the Ammonites across the river, because they had a king and they had, pretty definable lines of authority.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not so in God's Hebraic kingdom, because his unit of government begins with the individual. And I said at the start of our meeting here that government or leadership begins at the home. Well, it actually begins right in here, right in your own heart. We wouldn't need the Torah if we would actually begin to govern ourselves according to God's standards. Okay, so now I've gone into the theoretical here, but the main point is there is value in consulting with First Nations societies and finding out, how do you guys do leadership and government and eldership? How do you organize?
Yeah, saw that flash.
That must be ratification of what I said, right?
Oh, exactly. No, there's a lot of politically charged, work out there when you're looking at the history of the native peoples and how their cultures worked. Do you have any sources that you recommend going to? Any written or websites that don't have a political agenda that they're trying to push?
Yeah, well, I would start with what Sakina and Carmonique provide in Indigenous Messengers International. That's the name of their ministry. And read their book, Warfare by Honor. Warfare by Honor by Sakina.
What was the name of the ministry again?
Indigenous Messengers International. And the next thing I'd recommend is, Ron, help me out. What's the Riverwinds ministry? It's Firekeepers, I think. Chief Joseph and Laurelyn Riverwind from East Tennessee. And that, I think, would be Firekeepers International.
Firekeepers International.
Yeah. They have, they have many teachings, and you can get their teachings online. With the Sakinas, it's you can get the books. They also have some online resources as well, but those are the 2 native sources that I would first recommend. They're the ones that we are most familiar with. And from there, hey, they're each, the Riverwinds and the Sakinas are networked. So you can pull each thread, and you'll find many jewels in that.
Okay, yeah, I'll look those up and put links in the description for the recording later.
Yeah.
That way everybody can find them if they need to. All right, any other comments or questions? Nobody? Well, Al, do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to leave us? Is there anything? Well, actually, you know what? I do have a question.
Yeah.
I thought about it earlier. And, I guess we kind of talked about this a little bit, but there are always conflicts, always personality conflicts. And, we've had situations where somebody has a pet doctrine or idea that they're always wanting to go to, and it creates a problem. And, in part, you figure out how to deal with that stuff just through experience. But do you have any recommendations on dealing with problem members or conflicts between leaders or anything along those lines?
Okay. Specific examples. Again, I'd recommend our elders. Barry Phillips has talked about challenges that they have had. Mark Webb has talked about challenges they've had at Living Messiah, and they've had some extreme issues. So has David Jones at Ruach International down in Florida. But it comes down to love can cover a multitude of offenses if we allow it. It is inevitable that we are going to disagree. That's not the problem. The problem is if we're going to make this disagreement more important than the relationship that God has established between us. And that's why another of the ministries I'm involved in, Nations 9th of Av, soon to be called 10 from the Nations. Hey, as I said, I'm the unreformed two-house Ephraimite. My colleagues are Christian Zionists who would not by any means call themselves Ephraimites. But we have commonality in that we want to see the Christian and Jewish halves of God's family of faith come together to repair the breach and move forward together toward the promises, the kingdom promises of God, preparing this way for Messiah's return. So that means the inevitable differences of opinion we have on interpretations of the scriptures, while we do not discount them, we do not let those become a wedge that keeps us from what God has called us to do together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems that kind of goes back to the qualifications for a leader. Is it about the leader or is it about the congregation?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Russ, you've got your hand up. You can go ahead. There you go.
I was having trouble with the unmute. So going along with the idea of how to deal with issues within a congregation. One of the guidelines that I've found in the different organizations that I've been involved with that has helped is this core idea that the sages put forward, that Torah is not for death, it's for life. So it kind of in keeping with that, going toward approaching issues that you have with the idea that whatever the outcome of it is, your intentionality, your direction should always be towards shalom, should be toward an idea of bringing a completeness, bringing a wholeness to the situation. Now, it's not to say that that's always going to happen, and oftentimes in situations where you have a lot of strife or stress, that or an unrepentant sinner, for that matter, in the midst of the situation, then that's not always going to be able to come out to a complete shalom. But if your intention is for that shalom, if you're walking it out using biblical guidelines, I mean, Paul is very clear about how to deal with people that are walking away from a way of walking out scripture,
Mhm.
conflict within the congregation, all of that sort of thing. But if you're walking it out with this idea that what we're supposed to be doing is creating life, protecting life, creating shalom, then that helps you to guide the direction that you need to go. It doesn't make it easier by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, sometimes it feels like it makes it a little bit harder. But you know what you're striving for in the midst of that, and it does guide your reactions to the people that you are approaching, that are maybe creating the strife, or who are walking in a way that is not compatible with Christian teaching.
Mhm.
But that's my 2 cents worth in that. That has helped a lot in trying to determine the way forward.
Mhm.
And I think that it does help at least to structure what you're expecting, what everybody in that conversation then is expecting to come out of that situation.
Mhm. Yeah, as you're talking, I was thinking about a very very common problem whenever if you go to a marriage counselor, or if someone says, what's your advice for this new couple, the first thing that almost everybody goes to is communication.
Mhm.
You have to learn how to communicate with each other, and it sounds trite, and it's what everybody says, but everybody says it because it's true. And I know from my personal experience, both in marriage and in the congregational setting, that you can't let problems just go on forever. You have to address it. And that doesn't mean that you have to reprimand somebody necessarily, or there has to be an argument. You don't have to, have it out necessarily, but you do have to talk.
Mhm.
And not all disagreements need to be resolved. Some disagreements are okay just to have forever. But there are some disagreements where you need to have some kind of meeting of the minds, where you have to maybe take someone aside and have a friendly conversation, like saying, where are you really, and how can we come to some understanding and work together on this difference, or do we need to separate?
Mhm.
And that is hard, but if you let problems fester, they get worse.
Yeah.
Well,
Some
and
problems will go away on their own, most don't, especially between people.
right. Well, and approaching a problem without making it the mountain first.
Hmm.
Approaching the situation to try to understand it, as opposed to making a
Yeah,
judgment call
exactly.
right out of the gate. Because I often say I don't know what I don't know. Maybe I don't know what all is going on in that person's life,
Hmm.
and I'm interpreting how they're reacting to things, or the things that they're saying, in a way that maybe they just misunderstand the situation. Maybe they misunderstand the concept, and in discussing it, you come to a realization that, or they come to a realization that, oh wow, no, I had that structured wrong in my head. I understand now. Or even you're interpreting something about the way that
Hmm.
they're acting amongst other people, and really the fact of the matter is they're completely stressed out about other things that are in their own life, and they're taking it out on the people that are closest to them without really realizing it.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. And if they know
but
that
but some
somebody else there knows what's going on and sympathizes, sometimes that alone takes a lot of pressure off.
it does. Well, and one other thing that I would, of course, Al probably is laughing to himself, because I never have one more thing, but I always have a bunch more things. But one other thing that I would add into this is, don't go into it by yourself. If you realize that there's some complexity to the situation, that you realize that, maybe there's, that there's something else that's going on in there, find a resource that's going to help you to be able to know what to prepare yourself for as you get into it. Or maybe you find yourself in the middle of the ant's nest and you're like, oh, okay, so I need more information now because I don't know what to do in this situation. Reach out to people. You may not, for instance, you feel like you need a psychiatrist or a psychologist, or somebody that's trained in asking the right questions and trying to sort out what's going on in a person's life. A lot of times we're a little triggered by the idea of psychiatrists and psychologists, but I have some really great friends that are they're Christian, they're Torah observant, even that are counselors, and their guidance in situations has been very, very helpful. In some cases, it just is a validation or verification. Okay, am I hearing the right things here? Should I be concerned, or what questions do I need to ask? How do I need to approach this so that I can do the most good instead of the most harm? Those are important things, and you may not know a person that can answer those questions, but I bet you anything that you know somebody that knows somebody.
Yeah, and like you said, don't be afraid of seeking help from people who don't agree with you on everything. People are people, no matter what their background is. We're all essentially motivated by the same things. So there are things that I would never ask an atheist for advice on. But when it comes to interpersonal relationships, an atheist could have some great insights in them. If they do, then take it.
Yeah, it's true, and frankly, it's not tearing down. It's not tearing down your own, your own position in that situation, to be seeking out help in it. The good old red green quote: "We're all in this together." And we're all in this together, and
nothing a little duct tape and baling wire can't fix.
That's right. That's right. It helps to have people that can come alongside you, that can partner with you in a situation and be able to help that situation come out to something that looks closer to shalom than it would if you just flew into it blind.
Hey, Jay, to that end, I appreciate, and I just thought of this as Russ was speaking. When we had fellowship with you in Texas, you had a statement of faith, which was more than most home fellowships that I've encountered have. So yours was more than just a home fellowship. It was a stated, this is our community. But that statement of faith gave a guidepost for others to look to. This is where we're at, and you can assess and decide if you agree or disagree with it. I found that to be a very, very good tool. So just a word of thought.
Yeah, that actually came out of some conflict. We had one particular family one person in one family who was really stuck on one pet doctrine, and it was really becoming a problem because they made every conversation about this topic until it finally blew up one day, and he said, "Well, I don't want to cause division, so I'm just going to go do my own thing." Like, well, we didn't really have the chance to talk about it, and I didn't have the leadership skills at the time to know how to approach somebody and find out what was really going on. And those of us who were left got together and said, how are we going to handle this in the future? Well, let's start by saying, who are we? And we came up with a very basic statement of faith. Here's the bottom line: we will fellowship with anybody who fits within these guidelines, and it is minimalist. I mean, we don't want to put, we're not concerned with esoteric doctrines. The divinity of Yeshua is kind of a bottom line, but we're not too concerned with oneness or Trinity or, all the different variations of these beliefs. We're not too concerned with that as long as we worship the same God, recognize that Yeshua is the Messiah and is God. There's a lot of other stuff that we can work around.
Yeah.
But having to face having to face that problem, was very helpful for us, even though we lost a big chunk of our fellowship at the time.
See, these are necessary lessons, and often they can only be learned by experience.
Mhm.
It helps to remember what Paul wrote about, as far as it depends on you, live it in shalom with others. And then he expounded some more on that in 1 Corinthians 13 about what love is. But approach it with love. I am always trying to look for the common denominator, especially as working with our observant Jewish friends, observant Orthodox. They don't acknowledge Yeshua as Messiah, certainly don't acknowledge Messiah as divine. Oh, well, how are we going to find common ground there? There's plenty of common ground. And we just have to understand that we're going to disagree on this issue, and we are waiting with faith, expectant faith, that God will sort this out and declare the mystery in time and correct each of us in measure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we know from the story of Joseph that God doesn't always reveal everything all at once, and he's waiting for his time.
Yeah. But that you're always going to have the ones who don't want to reconcile and who are insistent that this must be the way. So, yeah, you do have to let them go.
Mm-hmm.
Ron has walked through that. Ron and Candy walked through that. I've walked through it. I think we all have to some extent. It's not fun and it's painful, especially if you're doing the best you can over a period of time to try to come to terms and heal the breach and make sure this thing doesn't flare up any further. But sometimes you just got to let them go.
Yep. Can't save everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the passages that's been coming up a lot in our fellowship lately is Romans 11, with Paul talking about the olive tree of Israel. And what does it mean that some branches are cut off when God promised to save Israel? It's like, well, God's going to save the whole tree, but that means that some of the branches have to go, and some of them will be grafted back in. Some of them are lost along the way, and that's not our responsibility.
Bingo. That's just it. When we want to play the role of the gardener or the forester, the one who's doing the grafting, that's the problem. Mm-hmm. We're the branches.
Yep. All right. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, I really appreciate you all being here. Especially Al. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us. This is a huge topic in the Torah movement. Well, it is a huge problem in the Torah movement, and it should be a huge topic. Yeah. So it's a good thing that we're here talking about it. And I hope that more communities, more cities face these problems in the near future, because these are, the growth pains that require new leadership and new structures. This is a good problem to have.
Amen.
So thank you again.
Thank you, Jay.
If there's any parting words, any links you want to drop?
No, I think you got them all, but everyone that I've mentioned, I'll just make sure you've got them so you can put them on the YouTube descriptions.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Thank you.